The most important tool that I have is my smartphone. I make money with it, I learn new skills with it, but I also spend far too much time on it. Over the next 7 days, I wanted to switch from one of the best iPhones ever made, the iPhone 11, to another popular phone, but also a phone that's over 12 years old at this point, the iPhone 4. I wanted to see how using an iPhone 4 affects my day-to-day, and also to see if it had any positive changes in my life, to see if this is something I want to continue using for the future. I feel like too often in these videos I blame the smartphone when typically it's just the user. My smartphone might be taking up too much of my time, but it's only because I'm choosing to use it. Through this experiment, I'm hoping I can figure out a way to get all the positives out of my phone without any of the negatives. I'm going to swap the SIM cards really quickly. I'm a little bit nervous about this because I know that T-Mobile is dropping support and coverage for their 3G networks, and I believe their 2G networks. So I'm hoping that I can actually get this thing to work. But I'm gonna swap these out really quick, and then we can see if you can use an iPhone 4 in 2022. So I would say the biggest thing that I'm concerned about is just overall usability with the phones. Obviously, my phone is running the latest and greatest iOS edition, whereas the iPhone 4 is only running up to iOS 9. And I remember iOS 9 being extremely laggy with the iPhone 4. So just overall usability, I think, is not going to be very good. But I'm hoping that that sort of encourages me to not use it very much. But there are obviously a lot of things that I do use my current phone for that I'm going to miss. Tracking the weights I lift at the gym, basic stuff like that, I think I might miss that. I'll have to figure out a different method to do that on this iPhone. After I swapped the SIM cards, I was already having trouble getting iMessage to work, so I just defaulted to using text messages only. But I did notice how the urge to grab my old phone was growing and growing, so in lieu of that, I put my old phone away and opted to use my laptop instead, which I found as a lot less enticing to just scroll and scroll and scroll on. But some things that were immediately apparent was the size of the screen and how basically none of the apps that I use on a daily basis worked with any type of consistency. Okay, so it's day 2 of using the iPhone 4 in 2022, and I'm noticing a few inconveniences. I have to have iMessage off. That's just totally off the table. I turned it off on my iPhone 11 back there before I moved it over to this phone because I was still getting messages, so I had to swap it back, turn off iMessage, and then swap it back over the SIM card. So it's currently working. I don't think I've missed anything. Hopefully I haven't missed anything. It's a little bit of a concern. It's like the same thing from switching from iPhone to Android, but this is also an iPhone. Another thing is Apple Music does not exist on this. This is just basically using iTunes. Apple Music came out after iOS 9, I believe, because Apple Music is not available on this phone. One thing I do really like about it though is that the screen's so small, I haven't been watching YouTube at all on it. But it's definitely, the battery life is actually okay because I'm not using it very much, but there are some things that are good, some things that are, it's basically like starting up on a brand new phone because nothing really swapped over. I'm using iOS 15 and this is running iOS 9, so we're 6 generations of iOS behind. So yeah, it's definitely been pretty tough, but it's been interesting to say the least so far. So it's been a few days since I started using it, and what I've noticed is there's definitely a bunch of positive side effects. There have definitely been some negatives for sure, but I'm using it a lot less. I feel like I'm more in the moment. With my wife, I don't resort to checking my phone to see if I got something because most of the time the text message doesn't even come through. So there are a lot of positives I think that I could pull from this. I just feel like I have to find a better middle ground between a phone that kind of is unreliable and something that's a lot less addictive, like my iPhone 11. I do think there's a middle ground there somewhere. I don't know what it is, but I know that it's probably not this phone, but I do know that these things always teach me stuff. It's always really interesting using my phone a lot less, and I do feel like I build up these good habits and then they go by the wayside, then I build them back up. But it definitely has taught me a lot of positives with this phone that I thought I could potentially have from using this phone, but until you start using it, you just don't ever really know. So for now, I wish it was more reliable, but I love how it's so uninspiring. It's just, I don't want to pick this up. It's the size of my fingers. I could play with it like this in my hands, but to actually use it, it's pretty much unusable other than for phone calls, and those are still iffy. So far, I must say it's like a 6 out of 10, maybe like a 5. And also, it has a headphone jack, so that's pretty cool. The iPhone 4 came out in 2010, released by Steve Jobs. It was one of the last phones that he ever released, and it was one of the most popular phones and releases of all time. With record crowds waiting in line at the Apple stores across the world, it is no surprise that it sold over 50 million units. It wasn't without fault though. This is the phone that Steve Jobs said the reason you're losing service is because you're holding it wrong. Since this phone was released, the average amount of time spent using our phones has ballooned up to 3.5 hours a day. That's almost 50 days in an entire year without sleeping, going to the bathroom, eating, or anything, just solely spent on our phones. The amount of smartphone sales has also risen from 296 million to 1.535 billion, over a 5 times increase since 2010. This phone isn't all good, but it's certainly not all bad. I definitely feel like a lot of the modern conveniences that you get with a modern smartphone, there are some definitely negative tradebacks with that definitely aren't talked about a lot. They always are improving the actual hardware of the phone, but a lot of times it's the software that's the problem. It's not the fact that it's got an amazing camera that makes it a phone that makes you sad or feels like you constantly have to check it or whatever. It's the fact that people are posting stuff on social media, you're spending too much time on it, you're not really living and engaging in the real world, because no matter what happens on this phone, it's 99% of the time it's not a real experience. I think phone calls are nice. I like FaceTiming, but most of the other experiences you'll get with this phone, they're not real world. It's not engaging in the real world. I think that's really important. So no matter what smartphone you have, you won't be in the real world as much as you should be. But if you have a smartphone like this that's not that nice, then you give up some of those modern conveniences like Apple Music, having your Maps app work well, having connection, being able to access the internet very quickly and very easily. If you're willing to give up those types of things, then I think it's definitely worth it. I guess I was hoping this would be Apple's version of a flip phone. It doesn't have all the modern conveniences. It still has the things about iOS that I really like, but it just doesn't draw me to the phone. I think potentially what I'm going to do next for the next challenge, I think like an iPhone 5 or a 5S, something like that, maybe an SE again to see if I like that again, but get my screen fixed, because I think that there are a lot of great things about this phone. I love how it doesn't pull me towards it. And I think that's a really good thing, but the iMessage and the overall reliability just hasn't been there for me. After day 3, a lot of the unreliability started to become too much to bear. I was missing phone calls from people. I was missing text messages from people who would end up calling my wife or texting my wife and saying, hey, why isn't Scott answering his phone? It became almost a little bit too much, to a point where I felt like I wasn't going to be able to finish the challenge. Hey, so this is day 4. Nothing too much has happened, but I mean, something's happening. This is like the 19th, 20th, 30th time that this has happened since I started this challenge, and it's very frustrating. I'm losing service like crazy. It's like completely unusable at this point. I'll leave the house and I just completely drop service. I never have service. I have it sometimes, but it feels like I never have it. And I'm sending text messages to my wife. It says I'm sending these. I'll put a screenshot up here, but it says I'm sending these from Thursday and today's Sunday. So I don't know what's going on. So it's just not working. The phone's not really operating all that well. I'm really struggling here. I hope I'm not missing any messages or calls or anything through my job. The guy I work with, I told him, like, just talk to me on Teams through our work computer, because I'm doing this stupid challenge for YouTube, and it is not going very well. So far, I'm a 0 out of 10 on this. A lot of my apps aren't working. I have the YouTube Studio app. This is a very common problem. This is the only app I have downloaded because none of them work, it seems like. And I open the app, I just clicked opening, and it opens, and then eventually it'll just say that it doesn't work. This is a very common problem. Almost none of the apps work. I get it. It's on a phone that hasn't been supported for forever. I guess I never really thought about that, but this is like it's still opening. Nothing's open. This is like the responsiveness that you get from the phone. If you hit home button, like, the responsiveness is just like, it's terrible. I think a better challenge would have been to do a flip phone instead of this phone, because this phone is at a point where I feel like it's basically unusable. I'm gonna keep pushing through with this challenge, but as of right now, I'm not having a good time. One thing I've noticed throughout this whole experience is just how spoiled I've become. This phone, the iPhone 4, a few years ago was the best phone that money could buy, and now just a few years later, I'm complaining about how bad this one is compared to this phone. Obviously, that's like the whole point. You're supposed to be improving. You're supposed to be bettering your life. You're supposed to always be trying to climb up. But I definitely feel like there's a lot of spoiledness in this. I feel like I haven't really taken a step back to realize how blessed I am that this phone is a 2 or 3 year old budget smartphone. Obviously, it's $600 or $500, not budget, but inflation and everything. I mean, it's relatively budget. And the fact that this phone is so good and relatively so cheap, at least compared to this phone, it's pretty remarkable. I think that I complain a lot about smartphones and how addictive they can be, but also like I have to admire just how amazing they've gotten, how amazing relatively cheap phones have gotten. I mean, you could buy an iPhone 10 or an iPhone 11 used for $200-$300. Like, that's a lot less than what this phone used to cost. And I think that as much as I don't love how people spend too much time on their smartphones, I do love how good they've gotten. I mean, there's probably a reason for that. I'm sure there's a financial reason for, like, there's a financial incentive for that. But at the same time, I think we have to appreciate the fact that we get to surround ourselves with technology that isn't available to everybody, and even the technology that's available to us is relatively so cheap. It's just remarkable. I think that I feel like maybe I complained a little bit too much so far in this video, and I wanted to just take a second to realize that, like, I understand how incredible it is. I'm talking solely about the experience with this phone, just hasn't been good. But I do think we have to appreciate the fact that these phones that are available to us are not that expensive. The new ones are pretty expensive, but even a used older phone is still amazing. I mean, this phone is 2-3 years old at this point, and it's still amazing. And so I think that we need to take a step back and appreciate the fact that we get to live in a country and potentially in a world, depending on where you live, where these phones are available to us at a relatively cheap price. All right, so it's the beginning of the day. It's Monday, the beginning of day 5. And I'm gonna have to call it. It's just not working out for me. I tried my absolute hardest to get this to work. I wanted it to work super bad. I thought this would be honestly a good thing for me, not being able to use my phone. That would be really good. I'm missing calls now. One of the guys I work with was calling me, and I did not get the phone call, and he messages me on Teams on our work computers and goes, "Hey, are you busy right now? I tried to call." And I didn't have a missed call on this at all, so it's over. I'm gonna have to call it. I can't, as much fun as YouTube is, it's obviously not more important than my job. So it was fun while it lasted. I got a lot out of it, but I definitely, it didn't work. Like, it stinks because I was actually like kind of looking forward to it. Like, it's a weird flex. It's like the type of flex that I would be interested in, where it's like, oh yeah, you got the new iPhone 15 or 13 or whatever. I have an iPhone 4. Your phone is 10 more than mine almost. And I thought that would be pretty cool, but it just, as it turns out, this thing is just simply too old to be using in 2022. I had so many problems with it. There's just so many features on my current phone now that I didn't even really realize I liked or needed that are baked in, that are just so much more convenient than using this phone. And I felt like at the end of the day, I wanted it to work. It could just be this phone specifically, but I think that I think this phone is just too old. I lost a lot of connection. I was constantly losing service. I was constantly not connected to the internet, whether I was connected to Wi-Fi or not. This thing would connect in, disconnect, connect in, disconnect. So it was really frustrating the whole time just trying to use this phone. The actual usability of it is pretty much nothing. I thought that might be a good thing, but the frustration of trying to check, how my stock portfolio is doing, or how many views a video has on YouTube, it's completely unusable. And honestly, I think it might be a little unsafe. I downloaded the app for my stocks and 401k are held within, and I second guessed logging in. I ended up not logging in at all, actually, because I was like, well, this is like 6 iOS's old. There might be like hacks or something available on this that I'm not really aware of, because they're not updating this. The security features are for iOS 15, the latest iOS version, not for this version of iOS. So I think that, generally speaking, I just don't want to lose that money or that data or anything. I don't want anything to potentially happen because I was doing a challenge for YouTube. So I'm calling it here. I do have some final thoughts about it though, that I definitely think I think this was a really interesting challenge for me, and I definitely got a lot out of it. At the end of the day, I feel like I learned a lot about myself. I have a newfound appreciation for modern technology and modern conveniences. This phone wasn't enough for me, and that's partially because I've built a life around a better smartphone. I think that I could live with this phone if I had to, but since I don't have to, I will choose not to. I will definitely make another video about using an older smartphone in 2022. Leave your suggestions down below. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching, and I hope everybody's staying safe and having a good day. Peace out.